your having the ability to recommend removal from office of ministers is a necessary deterrent for serious breaches of the legislation that you oversee?
One of the things that have came quite a few times, that the Prime Minister's staff, Chief of Staff, or the person who's responsible for Privy Council should not be managing the screen or the blind trust. Could you give your opinion on that?
Leave the room. The matter is handled, and then they are advised when they can return.
So when the screen is triggered, are there any mechanisms in place to provide a level of transparency?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
I appreciate you being here, and I'm looking to draw on your experience and some of the parallels, but also some of the contrasts between the legislation that empowers your office. With respect to the Conflict of Interest Act, it does not allow for the recommendation of prime ministers, or the prime minister or ministers, to be removed from office for ethics violations, even in the case of using offshore tax havens or serious breaches of the Act. Do you believe that your having the ability to recommend removal from office of ministers is a necessary deterrent for serious breaches of the legislation that you oversee?
Je vous remercie pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. I have understood that you want to know whether or not we have those kinds of measures in Quebec. The code applies to ministers and MLAs, so it is legislation for all elected officials, and I can recommend sanctions for any breaches to the code. For the sanctions, they are included in the code, so it goes from a reprimand, and they can lose their status as a member of the Legislative Assembly. So in Quebec, I can recommend a sanction or fines. There are different levels. There are 8 potential sanctions. And this is only a recommendation that I can make. It would be up to the chamber to decide. For ministers and for members, I could recommend a sanction. And the sanction depends on the significance of the breach. And an analysis must be carried out to decide which sanction, if any, needs to be imposed.
Do you think that your ability to recommend sanctions that include fines, monetary penalties, but also include the ability for you to recommend removal from office for serious breaches, do you think that that contributes to both the deterrent effect of that power, but also do you think that it contributes to public confidence in the system that you're responsible for?
I think that the ability for the Quebec Commissioner to recommend a sanction, even if it's only a recommendation, does put some weight on a report. The analysis will be carried out on a case-by-case basis, and so that is done before the recommendation of a sanction. I cannot speak to the public's perception, but it is something that is included in the code, and it is something that I have to navigate whether or not to apply sanctions.
Should legislation concerning the conflicts of interest of reporting office holders ensure that there is public reporting, for example, with ethics screens? Should there be reporting to the public on when the screen is used and what issue triggered the use of the screen?
I think that these ethics screens are an excellent measure. I think that it was part of one of my recommendations. Currently, our code does not include a screen. I can ask a member of the National Assembly to put in place measures, but that is not made public. I think that it is a good thing for these filters to be made, these screens to be made public. That said, I'm not certain that using this screen would build public's trust. I believe that commissioners need to put in place measures and make recommendations to factor in the public interest before an individual's interest. We need to see whether or not measures were put in place, but from that to having constant surveillance, I think that it's up to those who are subject to these rules to follow them. Thank you, Commissioner Mignolet.
Madam Motherwell, question to you. One of the things that have came quite a few times that the Prime Minister's staff, Chief of Staff, or the person who's responsible for Privy Council should not be managing the screen or the blind trust. Could you give your opinion on that? You have mentioned you don't see any problem, but this is a constant question that comes here. So I would like to hear your viewpoint, professional viewpoint on that matter.
Certainly. I think what I'm able to do is provide you with a description of what happens in Ontario, which is it is not administered by. So, and also to understand here that we're talking about two different things. Within as I understand it, within the federal environment, where we have a trust, and then there are sort of companion ethics screens that are implemented. And the question is about the implementation of those screens. In Ontario, as I indicated, there are 8 ministers with trusts. They do not have companion screens. Screens generally for us are employed for personal matters that would be separate from the trust. So the trust itself is dealing with the conflict that is identified through the members' Integrity Act on what are restricted assets. If a minister has those restricted assets, they go into the trust, and that effectively deals with the conflict. It takes it away by restricting the individual's access to and knowledge about what is contained in that trust. And so, as I understand it, within the federal context, the question is who should be effectively managing the screens that are in place. And as I say, within the Ontario context, the management of that is up to career public servants who are working in Cabinet Office.
Career public servants, who appoints them?
The government, but they are the most senior officials in Cabinet Office who are overseeing the screens.
So it will be the premier, you say, the most senior guys who will be appointing those people?
No, within the public service. So it's the Secretary of the Cabinet and people who serve her.
Thank you. Ms. Motherwell, you also mentioned that the screens in Ontario, and I could be wrong, I just want clarity, could be managed by their friends and family members?
No, they could be about a friend or a family member. So, for example, if you have a close family member who runs a business and that business is a significant stakeholder of the government, a screen could be put in place so that the individual member has absolutely no role and no knowledge of any government business that takes place with that business from the family member.
I want to ask Commissioner Motherwell a little bit about your use of ethics screens in the province of Ontario. First of all, is there a specific statutory mechanism or legislative scheme with respect to setting up such screens, or are they part of your general powers as commissioner?
They're part of the general powers.
Okay. So who administers ethics screens in Ontario?
It depends on the type of screen. And so, for example, screens, as I said, we tend to use across the spectrum. So we would advise a screen for an MPP. We would advise a screen for a minister. We would advise a screen for minister staff, that is for exempt staff, political staff. And we could advise screens even for deputy ministers. And therefore, within the realm of each of those groups, the administration will differ.
So can you give some examples of who would administer screens?
Certainly. So let's deal with a screen that has been recommended for a member of cabinet. In that case, generally these situations arise because they come out of a request for advice from me to the minister with regard to a certain situation. As I said, most of the time when we deploy screens, they're related to a family member who may have, for example, have a business that's a stakeholder of government. It may be about a relative. It's about a friend. They tend to be deployed for relationships. And therefore, I would make the recommendation that an ethics screen be implemented at cabinet. That recommendation then goes to the minister, who shares it with cabinet office. And cabinet office assists in the preparation of the screen, and also oversees in the implementation. One of the things that I have asked routinely of ministers, because I mentioned at the outset that I meet with every member, and so when ministers come in for their annual meeting, one of the things I will ask them about is about the screens and what happens when they're at cabinet and they're tapped on the shoulder, essentially, and advised to leave the room. Some ministers have many screens, some had none, but in those who have several, they tell me that they sort of turn the page of their virtual binder. It is blank. Someone does tap them on the shoulder, advise them and say, you are to leave the room. They have no idea why. They leave the room, the matter is handled, and then they are advised when they can return.
So when the screen is triggered, are there any mechanisms in place to provide a level of transparency, to provide the assurance that the screen is, in fact, being used as it was intended to be? And I guess as part of that question, to what extent is your office involved in seeing that the screen is actually working?
We're not involved in that aspect at all, although it is, as I say, something that I will ask ministers, and when I have the opportunity to speak with cabinet office officials, they can advise me that a screen has been put in place and has been implemented. But if the question is about, do I know when it has been triggered, when a matter is before cabinet, where a minister may have been asked to leave the room, I am not informed.
There are no other transparency measures in place. It is left to those who have been tasked with administering the screen and the public office holder to see that it is working. Is that the case?
Yes, it is. And as I said, it's tasked with career public servants who are working within cabinet office.
What about political appointees? Are they involved
With
in
political-
administering of screens?
When you say political appointees, do you mean, for example, individuals who would be appointed to chairs of public bodies, that kind of thing?
I'd be
Or
referencing, for example, political staff.
with political staff, it would be deployed at a different level, obviously, because they're not at the cabinet table, and
No,
therefore
sorry,
it would
just
be
to
deployed
clarify.
within the ministry. Right, so
I mean
it would
political
be-
staff within a minister's office.
Yes, and so
Right.
they would have done this in consultation generally with the deputy minister, but again, they're able to tap into the resources of Cabinet Office for the drafting of that screen.
No, I mean, would they be involved in administering it for their minister,
No.
for example?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay. Thank you.
What are, like, if someone is setting up a blind trust in the Ontario model, who can step in and provide that role as being a trustee?
The first element is that the trustee must be at arm's length from the member, and then I must interview the trustee. And so the member may propose an individual. We've certainly had circumstances where they've proposed a relative. And the relative may be professionally qualified in order to undertake that, but we have declined and said that doesn't meet, obviously, the arm's length test. Go back and please find somebody else. They will then come back with another individual. They can be from all different walks of life, but generally some of them are professional corporations that undertake trustee business as a natural part of their business, banks, that kind of thing. Or it could be an individual. It could be a CPA. It could be someone with that kind of background.
What sort of guidance does your office then provide to the entity or the individual that is stepping in as trustee?
Oh, we provide extensive guidance to them. We've developed a sort of a small portfolio of resources that we provide to them and make it very clear what the expectations are, and then of course there's the development of the trust agreement first. And generally what we find is that ministers will engage legal counsel, and so we do have some templates that we provide to them so they get an idea what the structure of this needs to look like. Then we receive that. We push it through our own legal counsel, and there's a little bit of discussion back and forth. Once we determine that the agreement is satisfactory, we will then, of course, be having those parallel conversations with the trustee, because essentially they can have an input into the agreement itself, but it's their responsibility then, in order to fulfill all the obligations, the requirements of the trust. There's different reporting structures. There's the understanding of exactly how these communications will work. And as I indicated, they're not permitted to speak with the minister.
Right.
All communications must run through me. So, for example, a very simple thing is that trustee must develop some documents in order for the minister to be able to submit their taxes once a year. And so any information that is provided to the minister for something simple like what kind of information do you need for completing your taxes, I must approve it. And I can tell you there are many times when I've received documents from trustees and determined that there is far too much information in this document. Back it goes. We ask for information to be redacted. The document is revised, and then it meets our standards, and then we will provide it to the minister. If the minister has any questions, again, they come back through us.
Because I would assume that there are clear restrictions either in the agreement or in the advice that you provide to a prospective trustee that restricts them from communicating with the office holder, in this case, about the nature of the assets or any development of the assets in the trust.
That's stated very clearly.
Yeah. And likewise, are there restrictions on the public office holder in terms of directions that that individual may give to the trust at its creation?
At its creation?
Yeah. Like, in other words, the public office holder can't direct the trust. You can't direct the trustee on how to hold, sell, how to handle the assets.
No, as I said, any communication after the trust has been implemented at that point, any communication related to this, and they understand it. interest. They understand this going in.
Does-
but they understand that they're not going to be receiving their investment statements. They're just not going to see that information. But I'll give you an example. So sometimes there are situations where they're sending a kid off to school and they'd like to be able to tap those assets and perhaps pull a little money out. Again, that kind of request comes to this office first. We then relay the request to the trustee, and the trustee makes whatever needs to happen in order to release those funds.
I want to ask some questions about sanctions. So I'll begin with Madame Mignolet. You referenced that you have the power to recommend 8 potential sanctions. What are they? Can you elaborate on the range of sanctions that you can recommend, having regard for the gravity of the breach?
So for the sanctions that I can recommend, they are as follows: a reprimand, penalties, financial penalties, refunding a donation or hospitality, refunding illicit profits, refunding any kind of benefits for the time of the breach, suspending the right to sit at the National Assembly, and a suspension of any kind of benefit until they comply to the condition. They can lose their seat, and they can lose their status as a member of the Legislative Assembly. These are the 8 sanctions that we have in the Ethics Code that I can recommend. My goal is not to recommend a sanction. It truly depends on the situation. I have recommended reprimand. Sometimes it was accepted, sometimes not. I have also imposed financial penalties, so it truly is a case by case. It depends on whether it's a first offense as well. There are many considerations that are factored into my decision. But my goal is not to punish. I'm not sure if I responded to your question.
Have a fairly robust range of sanctions that you can recommend. I would note that that is in contrast to our Conflict of Interest Act. With respect to financial penalties, what sorts of penalties could you recommend? What would be the range?
Alors, à la différence j'ai peut-être un...
I can make recommendations, and it might seem significant, but I can't impose these amounts.
And that it's up to the Assembly, but what would be the range of penalties on a monetary basis that you could recommend?
It would depend on what I would deem to be relevant. So I can't give you any kind of number. It really depends on the case.
Are we dealing with a few $100s, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars? I'm just trying to get an understanding, because in our Conflict of Interest Act, the penalties are very minor on a financial basis, a monetary basis.
In the Conflict of Interest Act, those sanctions are administrative for delays. I wouldn't be imposing penalties for delays in document production. In Quebec, I have to deal with 125 officials. And so I don't have to deal with those kinds of issues with delays in productions and declarations.
And then to Commissioner Motherwell, what sort of sanctions may you impose under the Members' Integrity Act?
Thank you. I think it's first important to understand what circumstances would lead to the ability to make a recommendation on penalty. And it must come as a result of an inquiry that I would have conducted, where I would have received a request from one member who believes that another member may have breached the Members' Integrity Act or Parliamentary Convention. So then after conducting that inquiry, which is incidentally filed with the Speaker of the Assembly and also published on the website, I can then, if I conclude that there should be a penalty, I have 4 options. I can recommend that no penalty be imposed. I can recommend that the member be reprimanded. I can recommend that the member's right to sit and vote in the Assembly be suspended for a certain period of time or until such time as certain conditions are met that I would set, or I could recommend that a member's seat be declared vacant. There are no monetary penalties provided within the legislation, and of course, as you noted yourself, it is of course then either to be accepted and voted on by the Assembly or rejected as it sees fit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper and Commissioners.
I don't believe we have any other questions.
And I hope you don't mind, members of the committee. I'm going to start with you, Commissioner Motherwell. We've had some witnesses who've come to committee who said effectively that blind trusts aren't really blind. As long as the designated public officer knows what's in those trusts, then obviously some of the decision-making can affect, especially on major policy announcements, the holdings within that blind trust. We've also had some other witnesses who've come before committee who've talked about the only way to avoid a conflict or the perception of a conflict is complete divestment of the assets in advance to assuming office. So for the 2 commissioners, I'm curious what your opinion is or would be of complete divestment as a means to gain public trust and public confidence that what is happening in some cases, the highest office of the land is not a conflict of interest based on those holdings. So I'm just curious about divestment, in your opinion.
We have had, so as I indicated, we have restricted assets for ministers. One of the things that's not restricted for ministers is broad-based mutual funds. And so we have had circumstances where a minister has come in and said, I think the easy thing is I don't want to go through all the trouble, the hassle, the expense of a trust. I don't want to put that on the public purse. And so what the individual has done is gone off and actually divested themselves and then put everything into broad-based mutual funds, which are then not a reportable asset. But I think what you're asking about is whether it should be a requirement that someone who goes into elected office should have to, and please correct me if I misunderstand the question, that they should have to sell their holdings and in order to gain the public trust.
Well, just to clarify, some of the witnesses have said that complete divestment of the assets before they enter, or while they're in public office, or before they enter public office, and then that the assets can then be administered within a true, what some people have said, a truly blind trust through, and where they don't know where where that money is actually being invested. I hope I clarified that. I don't think I did, but I hope you have a better understanding of what I'm saying here.
I do. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that it's an interesting policy point and certainly one that would, I think, require a great deal of discussion, because I think what you want to make this evidence-based. And so what you need also is to be making that decision based not on just supposition or suspicion that things are happening that people don't know about, but with actual evidence that things have taken place, that the trusts don't work. I have not seen evidence within my experience thus far that indicates that a trust does not work. I can tell you that, yes, the individual knows what's in the trust, and we're talking about trusts that are invested in investments as opposed to those that would involve a private business, for example. Obviously, if you have a car dealership, it goes into a trust. You always have the car dealership, even though you are then thus separated from actually running those operations. But if we're talking about those who have investments, they know what went in, but they don't know what happens. I see what happens, and I can tell you that trustees and the investment advisors do buy and sell. They trade, and so they will make changes to the holdings that the individual minister has no knowledge of. And so I would look for evidence in order to follow that policy option. I would look for obvious examples of where it is proven that the trust model, that trust framework, does not work.
Yeah, and I guess the rationale is that as a public office holder would divest, that would be made liquid, and then it would be up to the trustee at that point to determine where those investments go without the knowledge of the designated public officer. That's sort of what we've been hearing from different witnesses. Commissioner Mignolet, on the issue of divestment, I'm curious as to what your opinion would be on that.
Je suis d'avis, comme la commission.
As stated, Commissioner Motherwell, there needs to be discussions had in Quebec. We can choose to divest and to not use a blind trust. I don't have any information that would lead me to believe that these trusts don't work. A blind trust is a starting point. It is one of the measures that can be used to ensure that there is no conflict of interest, no favoritism. There are many measures that can be used, and the code allows me to suggest other approaches to ensure compliance. So in Quebec, in my experience, I have never seen a case where it would be absolutely necessary. It's not a simple matter, but it is something that is good to think about. That said, in Quebec, I haven't seen any issues so far.